He said, "I'll protect you forever." She thought it was just words until the bullets came and faith was tested. Listen to the end and you'll see how God can send hope in the most unlikely form. Stay with me and you'll hear how God turned hardship into a love worth keeping. So if you'd like to hear more heartfelt Wild West tales like this one, make sure to subscribe so I can share them with you every day. And if you're ready to ride into this story with me, give this video a like and drop the number 1 in the comments, so I'll know you're in the saddle ready for the journey. Now let us ride back to the dust-choked plains where the sun bleeds over the horizon and a lone nun walks into danger she never expected. The sun hung low over the Dakota plains, bleeding its last light across the horizon. Dust coiled through the air and the faint cry of a hawk cut the silence. Along a lonely stretch of trail, a woman walked with slow, determined steps. Her habit was torn at the hem, her face pale from exhaustion, but her eyes carried the steadfast fire of faith. Sister Catherine had not intended to leave her convent. The cloister walls had been her world, safe, quiet, and filled with hymns. But the world outside had found her. Greed had burned through the land like wildfire, and the convent had been claimed by it. A sheriff with ambition in his eyes and lawlessness in his hands had threatened to seize everything unless she surrendered herself to a life she had not chosen. She fled under cover of darkness, praying each step would not be her last. By the second night she was near collapse. Hunger clawed at her ribs and the desert chill cut sharper than any blade. When the riders came, 3 of them, their laughter crude and cruel, she thought perhaps her prayers had gone unanswered. They circled her like wolves, spitting insults, tugging at her habit as if holiness could be mocked away. She clutched her small wooden cross to her chest and whispered a trembling psalm. And then the gunshot rang. One of the men tumbled from his horse dust, spraying around him. The others froze. Out of the twilight rode a figure that seemed born of the land itself. A tall man on a black horse, broad-shouldered hat, low rifle, steady across the saddle. His shirt was frayed, his boots scarred by years of hard roads, and his eyes, though shadowed, burned with something dangerous and resolute. "Leave the lady," he growled. The remaining outlaws muttered curses, then fled, the thunder of their hooves fading into the horizon. Only when the dust settled did the rider lower his rifle. Sister Catherine stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. She had seen men of violence before, but this one was different. There was no sneer of cruelty in his face, only the weight of battles fought long ago. He dismounted, tall frame looming but not threatening. He tipped his hat, a gesture oddly respectful. "You all right, sister?" His voice was gravelly edged with weariness. She nodded, though her knees trembled. I believe so. You saved me. Don't thank me yet." He studied the barren trail, the fading light. "You've got no food, no horse. You won't last another night out here alone." Catherine tightened her grip on the cross. She had fled to save her vows, to preserve the sanctity of her life. And now here was a stranger, an outlaw perhaps, or worse, offering himself as her shield. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you help me?" The cowboy's jaw worked as though he wrestled with the words. At last he met her gaze, and the promise came heavy and final. "Because I'll protect you forever." It struck her harder than the gunfire had. Forever. Men did not speak such words in this land. Forever was a thing of heaven, not of earth. Yet something in his voice, something scarred and sorrowful, made her believe he meant it. Behind them the horizon grew darker, and the prairie wind whispered like a warning. Sister Catherine realized she had stepped into a story far greater and far more dangerous than the one she had fled. Some promises are spoken once and forgotten by dawn. But when the cowboy said, "I'll protect you forever," Sister Catherine felt the weight of it still echoing in the silence of the trail. She did not know his name nor what shadows clung to him, yet she walked beside him into the gathering night as if his vow itself were a lantern in the dark. The prairie stretched wide empty but for the sound of the black horse's hooves and the whisper of Catherine's prayers. The cowboy rode slow, keeping his mount steady so she could keep pace. At last, when the stars had spilled across the sky, a dim glow appeared ahead. an old cabin tucked beneath the ridge. "It ain't much," he said, reining in his horse, "but it'll keep you alive tonight." To Catherine it looked like salvation. The cabin's logs were weathered, the porch sagging, but the smoke curling from its chimney promised warmth. He pushed the door open and she stepped inside. The air smelled of pine and leather. A single cot lay in one corner, a rough-hewn table in another. Hooks along the wall carried a coat, a rifle, and a pair of spurs. This was not a home so much as a shelter, a place built for survival, not comfort. The cowboy set down his rifle, lit a lantern, and fetched a tin of beans from the shelf. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent too long alone. Catherine sat at the table, hands folded, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and unease. "You have my thanks," she said softly, "but I don't even know your name." He poured the beans into a pan, set it over the fire. "Jonah," he replied after a long pause. "Jonah Hayes." The name seemed to hang in the air. Catherine repeated it under her breath, testing it like a prayer. "And you, sister? What should I call you?" "Catherine," she answered. "Sister Catherine." He nodded once, as if carving it into memory. "If you believe in the power of faith and kindness, even in the harshest lands, give this story a like. It helps me bring you more tales from the Wild West." When the food was ready, Jonah slid a plate toward her. She bowed her head, murmured grace, then ate with the hunger of 2 days' flight. He ate quietly, eyes on the fire. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Catherine asked, "Why did you come upon that trail tonight? Why me?" Jonah set his plate aside, his jaw tightening. "I don't rightly know. Maybe I was riding nowhere. Maybe I was meant to be there." She studied him, the scars along his knuckles, the weary set of his shoulders, the sadness etched around his eyes. This was no ordinary drifter. He carried a history he had not spoken, one written in violence, and yet he had stood between her and death without hesitation. Later, when the fire burned low, Jonah pulled a blanket from a chest and laid it on the cot. "You take the bed," he said, "and where will you sleep?" He shrugged, unrolling a spare blanket onto the floorboards near the door. "Ain't the first time I've slept on wood." Catherine hesitated. "I cannot repay you for such kindness." Jonah looked up, and in the flicker of firelight she saw the truth behind his earlier vow. "Don't reckon you have to. Some things a man does 'cause he's trying to set something right." Her lips parted, but no answer came. She turned toward the cot, knelt first for prayer, and lay down. Sleep came slowly, her thoughts tangled between gratitude and fear. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters. Jonah sat awake in the dark, back against the wall, rifle across his knees. His promise was not light, it pressed on him like iron. For years he had carried nothing but regret. Now, in the presence of a woman cloaked in faith, he felt the first flicker of something he thought long-buried hope. Some nights pass quietly, as if the world itself dares not breathe. But in Jonah Hayes's cabin, silence was never empty, it was heavy with things unsaid. And though Sister Catherine slept peacefully on the cot, Jonah knew peace was fragile in the West. Promises, even the sacred kind, were always tested. Morning came with the scent of pine smoke and coffee. Catherine stirred, blinking against the pale light that filtered through the cracks in the shutters. She found Jonah outside, tending to the horse steam curling from the tin mug in his hand. His movements were steady, practiced, like a man bound to routine for survival. "Did you sleep?" she asked, stepping into the crisp air. Jonah shook his head. "Not much. Never do." Catherine folded her arms against the chill, studying him. His eyes, shadowed from years of watchfulness, scanned the horizon even as they spoke. It was as though he expected the world to break upon them at any moment. Inside, over a breakfast of black coffee and hard bread, she asked, "Why does danger follow me? The men last night, they weren't chance riders, were they?" Jonah's jaw tightened. He set down his cupped fingers, curling against the table. "No. Men like that don't circle a nun by accident." Her throat went dry. "Then they were sent." "Looks that way," Jonah said, voice low. "Question is by who and why." Catherine lowered her eyes. Memories surged, the sheriff's threats, the greedy glint in his eyes when he claimed her convent's land was his for the taking. She had fled with little but faith and a small ledger the Mother Superior had pressed into her hands. It contained records of bribes, land deeds, and the names of men who had fattened themselves on corruption. If the world knew what was in it, the sheriff's empire would crumble. She had thought only of escape. Now she realized she had carried danger with her. Jonah watched her closely, sensing the storm behind her silence. "You're running from more than hunger and cold, sister." Her lips trembled. "I carry something that does not belong to me but to the truth. And for that, men would rather see me dead." Jonah leaned back, exhaling slow. He had seen such fights before, good people crushed beneath the boots of men who twisted the law to their own liking. He had sworn never to fight another war, but when he looked at Catherine, fragile yet steadfast, clutching her faith as a shield, he knew his promise bound him deeper than he'd reckoned. By midday, he saddled his horse. "We can't stay here," he said. "If they tracked you once, they'll do it again." The road stretched out before them, harsh and unforgiving. Catherine rode pillion, her hands gripping the saddle as the black horse carried them into the endless sweep of prairie. The land was both beautiful and merciless, golden grasses bending in the wind, mountains rising in the far blue haze. They stopped by a creek at dusk, the sky ablaze with crimson. Jonah filled their canteens while Catherine knelt to pray, the water rushing past her like a hymn. She prayed not for herself, but for him, for the man who carried her fate as if it were his own. That night, as fire crackled low, Jonah finally spoke the words Catherine had felt lingering. "I walked away from men like the ones hunting you now. Thought I could bury that life." His eyes met hers, dark and unwavering. "But burying a thing don't make it gone, it just waits to be dug up." Catherine reached across the flames, her hand hovering just above his scarred one. "Perhaps this is not the past returning," she said gently. "Perhaps it is God's way of giving you a new fight, one worth choosing." Jonah's chest tightened. He looked into the fire, into the flicker of her faith, and for the first time in years he almost believed. But beyond the glow of the flames, unseen in the dark, riders moved like shadows across the ridge. The promise was about to be tested. What would you do if you were in Sister Catherine's place? Trust the cowboy or run alone? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Some promises are tested in whispers, others in fire. For Jonah Hayes, the vow he made, "I'll protect you forever," was about to be tried by blood and bullets. The shadows that moved across the ridge at nightfall had followed them into the heart of the wilderness, and now there would be no more running. Dawn broke with a gray sky, the kind that warned of storm or sorrow. Jonah had not slept. He kept the fire low, eyes scanning the horizon, every muscle tense. Catherine stirred beside the embers, the rosary still tangled in her hands. "You saw something last night," she said quietly, reading his silence. Jonah nodded. "Riders, 4, maybe 5. They'll be on us by noon." Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Then we must be ready." Jonah almost smiled. There was no fear in her tone, only resolve. It startled him more than any bandit ever had. By mid-morning, they reached a ravine carved deep into the earth. Jonah led the horse down into the narrow cut, the walls of stone rising on either side. "We make our stand here," he said. "One way in, one way out." Catherine touched the cross at her breast. "And if they come with more guns than you can face, then I keep my promise," he answered simply. "The fight isn't over yet, and the sheriff's men won't stop. Make sure you're subscribed so you can hear how this battle ends in part 5. He set to work quickly, scattering brush to cover the horse, checking his rifle, loading each chamber with deliberate care. Catherine knelt nearby, whispering prayers that rose and fell with the wind. For a moment, Jonah felt her words weaving around him like armor. The riders came at midday. Dust plumed behind their horses, their shouts echoing down the ravine. Jonah stepped forward, rifle braced against the stone, eyes narrowing. The first shot cracked like thunder, dropping a man from his saddle before he could even raise his gun. The canyon erupted. Bullets ricocheted off stone, horses screamed, men cursed. Jonah fired with grim precision, each shot a memory of battles he thought he had buried. Catherine pressed against the rock wall, clutching her rosary, every whispered prayer timed with the crack of his rifle. but numbers told their truth. Two riders dismounted, flanking low along the ravine. Jonah pivoted, but a shot caught his shoulder, spinning him against the rock. He gritted his teeth, forced himself upright, blood soaking his sleeve. Jonah, Catherine cried, rushing to his side. "Stay back," he barked, but she didn't. Instead, she tore the hem of her habit, pressing the cloth against his wound. Her hands trembled, yet her gaze held steady. The outlaws closed in, one sneered, pistol raised. "Hand over the Sister Hayes. Sheriff wants her alive. You not so much." Jonah raised his rifle with one arm, the barrel wavering. The outlaw laughed, and then Catherine did the unthinkable. She stepped forward, arms outstretched, her voice ringing through the canyon. "You may kill me if you must, but you will not have this man while breath remains in me." The outlaws hesitated. Even hardened killers knew the power of such defiance. Jonah seized the moment, firing once more. The shot dropped the sneering man, chaos erupting as the others scrambled. Jonah's blood roared in his ears, his vision dimming, but he kept firing until the last rider fled, the echo of hooves fading into silence. The ravine fell, quiet smoke curling from Jonah's rifle barrel. He staggered, dropping to one knee. Catherine caught him, her small frame bracing his weight. "You kept your promise," she whispered, tears bright in her eyes. Jonah's breath came, ragged pain etched deep across his face. "And you kept me alive. Didn't know a nun could be so stubborn." Despite the blood, a faint smile curved his lips. Catherine pressed her forehead to his, whispering a prayer not for herself, but for him, for the man who had chosen to stand between her and death, no matter the cost. But she knew this was not the end. The sheriff would not stop. The fight had only begun. Some battles are won with bullets, others with vows. In the silence after gunfire, as smoke drifted from the ravine and Jonah Hayes bled against her shoulder, Sister Catherine realized that keeping a promise was far harder than making one. They staggered from the canyon before nightfall, Jonah leaning heavily on Catherine's small frame. Every step was agony, but he refused to fall. "Not yet," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Not till I see you safe." By the time they reached a lonely chapel on the edge of a mining town, Jonah was near collapse. Catherine pounded on the door, and a gray-haired priest answered, his face etched with surprise. Together they carried Jonah inside, laying him upon a rough wooden bench beneath a cross that hung high on the wall. Hours passed as Catherine tore strips of linen, cleaned the wound, and prayed over every ragged breath he took. Jonah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering half-formed words. Memories of battlefields, names she did not know. Regrets that spilled like confession. At dawn he opened his eyes fully, gaze fixed on her. "You should leave me, sister. Sheriff won't stop till he's got what you carry. Don't tie your fate to a broken man." Catherine shook her head, her hands firm over his. "You are not broken. You are the very answer to my prayer. When I fled, I asked God to send me a protector. He sent you." Jonah's lips curved faintly, though pain lined his face. "Protector, maybe. But I've brought you nothing but more fightin'." And yet, she said softly, "You kept your promise." By week's end, Jonah's strength began to return. The priest, Father Elias, warned them that word of the sheriff's men was spreading. "He'll come here next," the priest said grimly. "His reach is long." Catherine held the small leather ledger, closed the burden of it heavy in her palms. "This is what he wants, the proof of his corruption. If it is shown to the judge in Santa Fe, the sheriff will fall. But to take it there—" Jonah pushed himself upright, swaying but resolute. "Then we take it, together." She looked at him, scarred, weary, but unyielding, and knew the truth. He had already given her more than protection. He had given her a choice. The journey to Santa Fe was hard, but each mile they rode, Catherine felt her heart shift. She had lived her life bound to vows of silence, humility, and separation from the world. Yet alongside Jonah, she had discovered another kind of vow, one that bound itself not only to God, but to the soul of another. In Santa Fe, they stood before the judge. Catherine's voice, calm but fierce, delivered the truth of the sheriff's crimes, the ledger pages spread wide upon the bench. Jonah stood at her side, hand resting near his revolver, a silent sentinel. When the gavel fell, the sheriff's empire crumbled. Justice for once had a face. That evening, as the sun slipped low and the town bells rang, Catherine stood outside the courthouse, her habit torn and dusted with the road. Jonah came to her side, his arm still bandaged. "You've got a choice now," he said quietly. "You can go back to the sisters, or—" His voice faltered, uncharacteristically unsure. "Or you can stay with me." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of mesquite and dust. Catherine looked at the cross she still wore, then at Jonah, the man who had stood between her and death, who had bled for his promise. Her hand rose, touching his cheek with reverence. Perhaps, Jonah Hayes, this was never about leaving God behind. Perhaps love itself is his greatest vow. Jonah's eyes softened, and for the first time hope steadied his soul. She smiled through tears. "You promised to protect me forever, and I choose to let you." In the years that followed, a small chapel stood on the edge of their land, its doors open to orphans and weary travelers. Jonah tended the fields and guarded the valley, while Catherine's hymns rose each dawn, her faith no less pure for being shared with a man. And whenever strangers asked how such a pair had come to be, Jonah would tip his hat, glance at Catherine, and say, "Only I made her a promise." In the harsh dust of the Wild West, the story of Jonah and Sister Catherine shows that God's promises often arrive through human hands. True faith is not only found in cloisters or prayers, but in courage, sacrifice, and love that protects the vulnerable. Their journey reminds us that God's greatest gift is not escape from suffering, but the strength to endure it together. Sometimes His answer is a person who chooses to keep a vow forever. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in love and faith. And let me know in the comments if you'd like more Wild West stories like this.